Now, the next thing I want to talk about, the fight between Twilight and Tirek. This is actually one thing where the fandom seems to pretty much all agree. They all think it's this incredibly intense and great fight. And, in terms of, I suppose, if you're just comparing it to other action scenes in MLP, yeah, it is. It's probably one of the better action scenes that the show's done. But in terms of the grander scheme of things, comparing it to, even other animated shows or action movies out there, it's pretty mediocre or pretty uninteresting, actually, I've got to be honest. To begin with, the most glaring problem with it, and I talked about this in the review as well, is, you've got Twilight possessing all the alicorn magic in Equestria, which is, 4 alicorns, and then you've got Tirek possessing all the unicorn magic in Equestria. It doesn't really make any sense for either of them to lose this fight, so even before they start fighting, I think to myself, well, this is a stalemate. The one cannot defeat the other. It wouldn't make any kind of real sort of realistic sense. So it's like this is quite obviously going to be a case of they're going to fire stuff at one another and they're going to be sort of evenly matched. And I was just sort of waiting for them to get to that point where they sort of figured that out. So it seemed like such a waste of time to me. But in all fairness, if you're just sort of looking at it from a visual standpoint, it is very impressive visually speaking. It did sort of leave me questioning as to exactly why the other 3 alicorns decided to give up their magic. I mean, if they kept their magic, we could have had 4 alicorns in this fight against Tirek. How cool would that have been? And not only that, they could have fought Tirek from 4 different sides. He would have been outmatched and outgunned almost. To use a term that isn't relevant to Equestria, but whatever. He probably would have been outmatched and outnumbered, and he might well have actually lost that fight, even though it's probably the same amount of magic being used against him. Again, it just sort of goes back to Celestia's plan. It doesn't make any sense. But anyway, this fight, it's very good visually, really impressive. A lot of people were asking me why I didn't reference Dragon Ball Z in the review. I didn't quite understand that at the time, and to be honest, I still don't understand it. Apparently, a lot of other people were referencing Dragon Ball Z. Does that mean I have to as well or something? I don't know. I don't get some people. It's also, to be fair, fairly short. It's actually less than 2 minutes, and I didn't actually realise that. When I went back to reviewing the episode, I had no idea it was as short as that. I guess I was just so bored watching it that it just felt like a lot longer. But yes, they do sort of fairly quickly sort of get to the point, that they are evenly matched, and there's nothing to be done here other than strike some kind of deal. And obviously, it destroys Twilight's house, which is important to sort of the bigger narrative of this show. But rewatching this fight scene recently between the two of them, it also sort of struck me that there's another kind of problem with the action in this show, which I've never thought is particularly good, and is certainly not the reason why I watch this show at all. And that's that there just isn't much of a unique style to the action in this show. It doesn't have any kind of unique kind of look or feel to it, which is a real shame, because generally this show has a very distinct kind of unique kind of style. I mean, what other show has talking horses? So I would have expected the action to just look a bit more original. You could be watching any show, really, when you watch that fight between Twilight and Tirek. It really doesn't look like My Little Pony. It really doesn't look like you're watching something amazingly original. You could be watching any animated action-based show, really. You have, like, Last Airbender has its bending. The superhero-based shows have all the different superpowers they use. Actually, Power Pony's action scenes were quite good, now that I think about it. Even in this show as well, Daring Don't. There's different sort of Indiana Jones kind of style or look and feel to the action in that episode. But the fight between Twilight and Tirek was a very sort of generic kind of action-based scene, and actually kind of almost had a vibe of Doctor Who's Quarries to it. With the way it was just a sort of desolate kind of landscape, and all this rock was being blown up and these sort of large hills. It just didn't look like My Little Pony to me. It just really could have been any show I was watching there. So that's another problem for me. But as I say, maybe I'm not the best person to be talking about the action in this show, since I'm not really a big fan of it. And to be honest, I have to say these sort of Fate of Equestria type stories don't really interest me in the same kind of way as the slice of life stories do. And really, if the Fate of Equestria stories were the ones that were sort of the main body of this show, they were the main thing that they did, I probably wouldn't be a fan of this show, actually. I've got to say. You know, a lot of people have sort of kind of annoyed about the remark I made in my original review about how, you know, this is a slice of life show, you know, it sort of like shouldn't have action scenes or something, or it shouldn't have Fate of Equestria stories, or something like that, I think I said. I didn't mean to say it like that. It was sort of like, from my perspective, all I'm really interested in when it comes to this show is the slice of life stories. These sort of two-part Fate of Equestria type stories, they're just not as interesting to me. And I'm not quite sure why that is, really. I think maybe it's just that I don't think the Fate of Equestria stories are nearly as good as the slice of life stuff. They just don't get thoughts going in my head in the same kind of way that the slice of life stories do. They just don't feel as engaging. They don't feel as interesting. And the only one, really, which I really thoroughly enjoyed was the Cancelot Wedding. And that's, I think, probably because there is kind of a slice of life element to that story, because, you know, it's a wedding. Maybe I'm just not a particularly good person to be talking about this episode or to be reviewing it, really, because it is a Fate of Equestria story, and I just don't think that this show does those types of stories quite as well as the slice of life stuff. I mean, the setup for the, you know, big cast of characters that they have here and the setting that it is in, it does feel much more suited to slice of life type stories. But, you know, I don't think they're bad stories, you know, the Fate of Equestria ones that they have had. And they're certainly perfectly kind of logical kind of setups, you know, with the characters and where they're going and what they do in the stories. So I don't quite know why, you know, since I do enjoy action-based shows for the most part, you know, and Fate of the World type stories for the most part, why they would not interest me when it comes to this show. So, you know, that's kind of a mystery to me. They just, these season premieres and these season finales, these two-parters, they just never grab me in quite the same way. I guess maybe it's just that the slice of life stuff is just so good that the sort of slightly lower standard of the two-parters maybe just is made to look bad by comparison, perhaps.